to go along with that, we want to encourage that interaction. I wanted to go back to a couple questions that I didn't think I answered as well as I could have last time. And so I thought your name was Mary, but I think it was Marcy who asked about the quaking aspens being in this area of the Canmore Bow Valley area. And my response was like, I wasn't really sure. I knew that there was poplars in the area, but I wasn't sure about quaking aspens. And so after the class, I went and looked it up. And I'm glad I included the botanical name for it, Populus tremuloides, because it turns out that quaking aspen and poplar are one and the same species.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, so you were right, Marcy, and I was kind of right but kind of wrong.
Oh, no, I was just guessing. I was wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I think that kind of illustrates is what I'll talk about in next class is the importance of understanding the difference between common names and the common names for plant species can change from different regions. And that's why even though the Latin botanical scientific names, in this case, Populus tremuloides, it sounds really esoteric and fancy, but it's a system of like standardizing the names for plants so that we know we're talking about the same ones. And so, yeah, so if you had learned the name of that tree as quaking aspens, and all these years when I saw it, I just thought poplar. That's where these miscommunications can come in, and that's where the value of that scientific naming that we'll talk more about next time.
Well, and what occurred to me is, so when I see one of those trees, it's not by itself. It's connected to like a gazillion other trees in the valley.
Yeah.
So that was the big wow factor for me, which is why I wanted to know if it was the same tree or not.
Yeah. So it is technically it's all the same organism because it's connected in the root system, but yeah, different trees up for winter. So interesting stuff. And then the other question that I got that I feel like I could do better on was Jack's question about the tendril producing plants. And Jack asked if they don't have something to climb up on, these vining plants, does that affect like the growth of the stems and the leaves? And so I've never observed any difference in terms of like how well it grows vegetatively. So I don't think it really makes a big difference in that sense. But when you have like a vining plant that's growing along the soil, it would affect it could have the potential of affecting the leaves and the stems, in that its proximity to the soil makes it more vulnerable to like fungal and bacterial diseases. So in that sense, a vining plant growing along the soil can affect its growth. And then also, if we think about like our context here in the Bow Valley, I don't see too many people with big enough yards to have a lot of space for growing plants. And so space efficiency is a really important thing. And so if you want to grow a vining plant like beans or peas or watermelon or winter squash, and you leave it along the ground, it'll spread out and take up a lot of space. Whereas if you build a very simple trellis for that vining plant to go vertical, you're making a very efficient use of that space, going vertically rather than horizontally. So those are the reasons why creating a trellis, and I can talk more about trellis design in the later classes, but that would be my response, my improved response from last time, if you will. And so I ran out of time last time, and I skipped over the basic structures part of the flowers. So we're going to quickly go through what those structures are, because when you see a flower, it's not just a flower. There are really, really important structures within it. And you'll see as we move along, as we get to seed saving and maybe a little bit of plant breeding, knowing these finer details are going to be very important. So the stem that connects the flower to the main stem, so this secondary stem is called the pedicle. These green leaves along the back of it is called the sepals, and they help protect the delicate flowers. They prevent it from drying out. And then the petals, as we talked about last time, can also be called the corolla, and those are the means of attracting pollinators. But again, plant world is diverse and complex. There are a lot of flowers that are wind pollinated, and so they don't need to attract pollinators. And so why put extra energy or any extra resources in making it look beautiful when you just know that the wind is going to take the pollen? And so there are a lot of plant species that have very inconspicuous flowers. For example, if you ever see spinach in the flowering stage, you'll be like, that's not a flower. You know, it doesn't look anything like a flower, but believe me, it is. So then we want to talk about the male structure of the flower, and that is called, all in all, it's called the stamen. And so that is the reproductive structure, the male part of the reproductive structure, and it refers to both the filament and the anther. The anther is where the pollen is found. It's right at the tip of it, and it is held up by a slender, like, filament that we call, well, a slender stalk called the filament. And so it's held up there so that when a pollinator comes in to get some of the nectar, then the pollinator is going to brush up against that anther and pick up some pollen on its hind legs or its belly. And as it flies to the next flower, then hopefully it is deposited into the female reproductive structure, which is called the pistil. And the pistil is made up of the stigma, which is at the end. It's a very receptive, sticky surface that wants to receive the pollen from another flower close by, thanks to our pollinators. And it's held upright by the style, which is, again, a slender stalk. That just connects the stigma to the ovaries, and the ovaries is where the female egg cell or the ovule is located. And so if successful pollination occurs, the pollen will land on that stigmatic surface, and it actually grows a tube down through the style where hopefully it fertilizes the egg, and that initiates the maturation of those seeds. And that brings us to our little basic structures of the seeds. And so on the outside of the seeds, I guess I should stop first because I have two different diagrams. Well, I guess I have three, but these two that I'm using my cursor over right now. The bean seed is representing what we call a dicotyledon or a dicot, whereas the corn seed, this diagram, that's representing a monocot. And so a lot of the garden crops that we grow can be characterized or classified as dicots because they have these two little dicotyledon leaves that are produced. And that is in contrast to the monocots, which you could either think of grasses are monocots, or allium family plants, which is like your onion and your garlic and your leeks and your chives. Those are all monocots because they only have one of these cotyledon leaves that emerges out of the seed. So that's a little primer on classification for next class, but needed to kind of point that out here. Both of them have a seed coat, and the seed coat, or otherwise known as the testa, is just protecting the insides, the precious insides of the seeds from harm, holding them in. Nothing fancy here. The seed coat at some point, it's not in this diagram, but at some point in all the seed coats, there'll be what's called the micropyle, and that's just like a little hole in the seed coat, which allows for water to diffuse in, osmosis in? No, I don't know. It just goes in when it finds the right conditions. And that's actually one way. Sometimes when we prep seeds, bigger seeds to be planted, we can soak them overnight in order to speed up their germination and increase the chances of germination. And one way of telling whether the seed is any good, if it's viable, is after a couple hours, all the viable seeds will have fallen to the bottom of that water container, the cup or whatever you put it in, and any inviable seeds that aren't going to sprout, they stay at the top. And that's because the micropyle isn't working. The water wasn't allowed to go into the seed, so it stays buoyant. But moving along, as you can see, for a monocot like the corn, they have what's called the endosperm, and that is that energy storage area that's got all that carbohydrate nutrient that that seed needs to basically just live in a somewhat dormant form while it's waiting for the proper conditions. And for a dicot seed, that energy storage is in the cotyledons here. And then all seeds have this embryonic start of what will become their stem system and their root system. And in there, that's where the genetic coding is for them to run all the, basically create themselves and go through their entire life cycles. That's the script that everything in the cell reads, mostly the proteins, or the thing that makes the proteins. We'll get there. So that's a little crash course on seeds. And then I included this little diagram of a grain seed, just for the purpose of, we all are familiar with bread already. And so if this is a seed, a wheat seed, then you can see the endosperm here. Again, that's the energy storage. And then down here we have the germ, which is the equivalent of this embryonic stem and root system. And then we have the bran. And so what's happened in the last, technologically wise, since we've developed like this industrial way of processing and milling wheat seed, is we have separated that entire germ and bran from the rest of the endosperm. And we have bread. Wonder Bread is just pure endosperm, and there's absolutely none of the bran or the germ. And that's why Wonder Bread doesn't really have any nutrition. They have to refortify it. It tastes really soft and sugary. That's why we like it. And it stays really well on the shelf, but it's just been processed the bejesus out of it. And so that's why they have to reintroduce vitamins into that bread. So I hope maybe that helps you kind of understand from a different perspective when we're talking about seeds. I'll take any questions regarding that, or I can move on. Okay. Am I good to move on, Lou? Okay. So that was just trying to tie up some loose ends from the last class. And now we're going to move into the life cycle strategies of plants. So from last class, we have a good base foundation. We know the parts of the plants and what they do, each do. Now let's add context to that and look at when they're doing it, and some interesting strategies here, and see how we can apply that to the garden. So we're going to pick it up with seeds because that was the last that we left off with. And so we don't have to spend too much time with this, because now we know that they are living and breathing, and they're in this kind of state of dormancy, just kind of waiting, trying to hold on to as much of that energy as they can until they get those favorable conditions. And because we want to help them, then we know that we can help them accomplish that by keeping them in a cool, dry, dark place. So yeah, just that's pretty much review here. Like there's not that much dynamics going on there. And then I also mentioned last class that some seeds, the more wild, uncultivated seeds, have these really interesting dormancy breaking strategies. And I skipped over it pretty quickly, but so some seeds need light conditions, like certain light conditions to in order to germinate. They just will not do their thing until they get the right conditions. So one example of that is comes from a book called it's called Seed, Sex, and Civilization. And they talk about how there are some species of trees that if their seeds fall in a grove or a stand of the forest, and there is a dark green wavelength coming through and hitting the testa of their seeds, then they know based on the wavelength, the dark green wavelength, that it's not really good conditions to sprout. So they just wait and wait and wait. And then hypothetically, if a windstorm comes through and knocks down a bunch of trees, and all of a sudden that quality of light goes from dark green to light green because now more light is filtering through, then they will sprout. So, yep.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. When you're done that point, there's a question in the chat about soaking seeds. If that's, you can soak any seeds overnight or only certain kinds of seeds?
It's more recommended for like bigger seeds with tougher seed coats. So like if you wanted to plant beans or peas or something like that, they're quite big. But once you get to a certain size of seed, it becomes very hard to handle them when they're wet. Like they'll just stick together and they'll stick to your fingers at a certain size. And so I don't recommend soaking smaller seeds because they'll just be too hard to handle. That's just my experience. And maybe my experience is skewed because when I start seeds for the school garden program that I was running, I was starting quite a lot of them. So it would just take too long to sort through them. But yeah, mostly recommended for bigger seeds with larger seed coats. And then I also mentioned that some seeds, like some seeds need to be chilled. We need to replicate that frost thaw kind of cycle. So putting them in the freezer for a little bit and taking them out. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, there are species like lodgepole pine that has this thing called serotiny. Their cones, which hold the seeds in them, will not open until they're exposed to very high heat. So the lodgepole pine grows in areas that are naturally inclined to regular forest fires. And so this is like a cool little technique that they use. Like if a forest fire comes through, then that's a good sign for those cones to open up, because that means there's probably more space around it to grow and get established before other plants kind of close in around them. And then the last cool thing about these dormancy breaking strategies that really does apply to gardening is that some of them have like these countdown clocks, essentially. If you ever split open a tomato and you pull out some of their seeds, you'll find that they have like this gelatinous sort of covering around them. They'll be very slippery. And so this is like, it's called abscisic acid. And the idea is that if you want to save tomato seeds, then you have to ferment them for a couple days and get rid of this abscisic acid. Otherwise, it's going to prevent those seeds from sprouting. And so I'll talk in a future class how to do this. But as it stands right now, this is the fact that you need to kind of ferment them for a couple days. This is replicating what it would be like if an animal ate the fruit with the seed in it and it passed through their digestive system. And that's what ferments it. And basically that's what achieves this dormancy breaking strategy for that plant.
Art, you have a question to ask? You had your hand up there.
Yeah, I thought I would just add a bit to talking about the seeds and providing the proper light conditions and conditions for germinating. I grow a lot of wildflowers and alpine plants, and for an alpine plant, what I do on the north side of the house, after seeding in pots, they get buried in snow to provide that length of time for the to break, and they'll germinate.
Yeah.
And also interesting talking about the seeds, and you were talking about the lodgepole pine and how they have to have the right kind of conditions. Well, on a some of the alpine plants, they grow a very long tail on their seed, hoping to catch the wind, but half of the tail on the seed will evaporate and actually start to form a corkscrew, and it'll go down into the ground and can preserve there for years to come in case of a flood or, you know, avalanche or something like that, that those seeds actually have that adaptive ability to hold on deep in the ground.
Yeah, yeah. So many fascinating, all these different species have these fascinating adaptations that just make them perfect for where they're established. I love it.
Yeah, just incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so the last thing I want to say about seeds at this point is we think about plants when they're photosynthesized. Just because they're plants and plants photosynthesize, we think of them as breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen. And during this seed stage, they are actually breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide, which is the opposite. And so I just want to mention that, because if you're storing your own seeds over the winter, and there's a way you can dry them out enough where this doesn't apply. But if you just have them at the normal humidity, then they need to be in like a breathable container. They have to have access to fresh air. And yeah, so now I just quickly go through, like, when we think about seeds and how much energy their parent plants put into those seeds, it is pretty important for those parent plants to figure out a way to get those seeds as far away from them as possible. And so this video is showing the ballistic strategy of getting those seeds away from it. Wouldn't do the new seeds any good if they fell right at the base of their parent plants and they were getting shaded out and they were competing with the same nutrients. It'd just be a really bad strategy. So there's all these cool seed dispersal strategies for trying to get the next generation that you've just put all this energy into, and to get them to get established a ways away from their parents. So these videos, this is just examples of ballistic seed dispersal. And one example here in the Bow Valley that I've seen is the caragana bushes have this ballistic. As they dry out, then all of a sudden they'll pop and they'll send them out. And then I'm sure we're all familiar with the parasol technique for dandelions. They have these very fine hairs. They're called pappus, and that allows them to be transported by the wind for quite a good distance. I'm sure we're all familiar with enticement. So a bigger succulent fruit like apples or peaches or something like that, their strategy for transportation away from their parents is to surround the seeds with a delicious present for a larger animal to carry them away. And then another example is burrs. I'm sure we're all familiar with burrs. Those are seeds with hooks on it, so that if an animal walks by, then the animal will provide that transportation for the seeds to take them far away. And burrs were actually the inspiration for the inventor of Velcro. So thank you, burrs, for anybody who has an affinity for Velcro. And then another one is water flotation. So coconuts are the best example of that. But we don't have a lot of that in the Bow Valley, so we're not going to spend too much time. And then this one is, I don't know if you could say it's seed dispersal, but it's a really interesting behavior shown by some trees. It's called masting, if anybody's ever heard of that. And so what happens is, again, like if you're a pecan tree or an oak tree and you're making these big acorns and nuts with the seed in them, then those are quite calorically rich and they're big, and so they're very attractive to herbivores or omnivores in the forest. And so the way that they figured out of overcoming this predatory this predatory pressure on their seeds that they spend so much resources making is that every single tree in that forest, and in fact for hundreds and thousands of miles, every single tree of the same species will go a number of years not producing any seeds at all. And then one season, they all produce. They absolutely, it's acorns or whichever species is just littering the forest. And so from one point of view, it's really interesting that they can coordinate in this way, because scientists have been studying this and don't really understand how they are all on the same page here. They think it has something to do with those volatile organic chemicals that they're communicating with each other. It might have something to do with the fungi, the mycorrhizal fungi that connects them underground. Maybe they're communicating that way. But regardless, we just don't know. There's not enough research at this point to figure out how they're able to communicate and coordinate in this way. And the way it makes sense for them is that if they produced just some of these seeds every year, then those herbivores or the omnivores that would eat those seeds, their populations would be very high, and they'd eat too many of those seeds. But if they go a number of years without producing, then those populations of animals get low enough to the point that when there's this massed year of just like tons and tons of their seed produce, there's not enough of those predators around that are going to impact the number of seeds. And in fact, if you are a lonely squirrel in the woods, and all of a sudden there's a mast year, what the squirrels do is they bury a whole bunch of them for later, but they forget where they put all of them, and they, in effect, the trees have tricked the squirrels into planting their own seeds for them. So I would love to talk more about that, but it doesn't apply as much to gardening in the Bow Valley. I just think it's a really interesting strategy that bears mentioning here. And then another one, again, with this idea of how precious these seeds are to the parent plants, how many resources they put in it. There are a number of species that make their seeds somewhat poisonous. So that acts as a deterrent from animals using them as a big source of energy. So we'll move on unless there's a question about that, but
Don't see any questions.
yeah, thank you. Oh, starting again. Okay, so that pretty much thoroughly covers the seeds. And now we're gonna move on to that next stage of plant growth. So this is formally named, like in a scientific way, we would talk about this as the cotyledon stage. But it's very identifiable based on the odd shape of their leaves. And so that's why this stage, we could call it the cotyledon stage for the first cotyledons that come out of the seed coat. But most common gardeners, we just call it the false leaf stage because the leaves do not look like what the eventual mature leaves will look like. And so that's how we identify this stage. At this stage, you have to understand that this little seedling is just running on the last stored energy from its mother, its parent plant. So it makes it behave in a couple ways, if you understand it this way. A seed, when it first sprouts, and I guess I should stop here. I made the distinction earlier between the monocot and the dicot. So the picture on the left here is obviously a monocot because it was just one leaf that emerged. So that is either a grass seed or I can't identify that. And then over here, this is the dicot. So you can see the two leaves. So that's the difference there. But at this stage, because they are running out on the last energy that they had stored up, and because their surface area for their leaves are so small, if they don't get 14 to 16 hours of light a day, then they tend to get leggy, which is the gardener term for a seedling that gets too tall, too fast, and in most contexts, this is a bad thing because if we have leggy seedlings and we plant them outside where it's windy, they just get blown over way too easily. So it might seem counterintuitive. You might see your seedlings and want them to be growing tall fast, but a plant at this stage of growth, we want to keep them nice and short and robust and stout. And if they get a lot of light, then rather than spending that last bit of energy trying to find more light, because if we could say that they have minds, then in their mind, if they're not getting enough light, they need to find it. They need to find that light as fast as possible, or else they think that they'll get shaded out by other plants. They're trying to find their real estate. But as a gardener, if your context is to plant these seeds outdoors, then you want to make sure you're getting them a lot of light and to keep them short and stout and get them to focus their energy on having a nice thick stem and a nice robust root system. The other thing to consider here is that because they're still running on that last bit of energy, they don't compete very much in their root zone whatsoever. So you can start seedlings really, really close to each other at this point, and they're not going to compete with each other. When they get to the next stage, that's where the competition comes in, and that's where we would start to worry about it. But at this point, if you have to plant them really close to each other, then there isn't going to be any negative effects there. And so to prove or like to illustrate my point with that, if you look at how microgreens are grown, they are planted very, very densely, and there are no signs of stress because they're not using very much at all the energy. They're not taking up nutrients so much from their root system yet. The next stage, that's when that starts. Microgreens, you can plant them really close and there's no worries about root competition. And then I would also point out, because I'm talking about microgreens here, that this rule of giving seedlings 14 to 16 hours of light per day doesn't really apply in this context. You're gonna harvest the microgreens pretty much at this stage. And so if they get less light and they get leggy, that just means you get more of the microgreen to eat faster. You know, that's just encouraging a faster growth period. And so again, this is why we have to consider different contexts when we talk about how we start our seeds. And it also illustrates why microgreens are such an appropriate crop to grow in your house during the winter here in the Bow Valley. We don't get a lot of light. So growing plants in the winter, it's not even the heat, it's the low light conditions here in the Bow Valley that makes growing food in the winter very challenging. But that doesn't apply to microgreens because just having a little bit of light is really all they need. And if they get taller quicker, all the better. The faster you're harvesting those delicious and nutritious microgreens. And then the last thing I wanted to say here for the cotyledon stage is think about the implications on our weed management strategies in the garden. The last class I talked about how an established weed in the garden, you can pull it once and it has that energy in its established root system that it will sprout again, but you can pull it, you know, so you can come back a couple times and you'll eventually get it out. And it works, but that's still not that an attractive thing to do because that is, you know, that's a lot of grunt work coming back every week and being more out stubborn than a weed. And so when we think about weeds in the garden, if we pull them at this stage, they basically have no energy in that root system yet. They basically have no biomass going down, holding and anchoring itself into the soil. So if we are on top of weeding when they're at this stage, it's like, it's a flick of the wrist and it's like a fraction of the second and it's done and it's over. There's no coming back, you know, because it's just that small, it's that vulnerable. So if that's, I really highly recommend. A lot of people think about weeding as being this drudgery and you have to be in the garden for hours bent over. But in my experience, the best way to do weeding is to do a little bit very often. I tried to make it a rule in the garden where if somebody came into the garden or if I came into the garden, the first 5 minutes I spend should be doing just a little bit of weeding. And then after that, my back starts to feel sore and I don't want to do it anymore. So if you do it often, but just in smaller increments, it doesn't feel like drudgery, and you're getting them at this stage where they're really, really easy to remove.
We have a question in the chat here. Is that all types of plants, and can you use extra lighting? It's from Jack. Not sure if you need a little bit more context or.
Yeah, what's he referring to?
Jack, do you want to unmute and ask your question with a little
You
bit
were
more
talking, do you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so you're talking about, when you're starting plants or seeds and they get leggy because you don't get that 14 to 16 hours. So is that kind of across the board, just about any plant that you start, any seed? And as well then, can we, if we're not getting that much light, if we're starting our plants, say now or in the next little while, can we add supplemental light? Will that help them from getting too leggy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't apply across the board to all plants. I mean, I should stick to just our context, but like think about people in tropical, like in the tropical climates where the sun is directly overhead. They actually have to shade their seedlings because of that direct sunlight. But I shouldn't talk about that because that's not appropriate for what we're talking about. There are a couple plants in our context that I don't give them this extra light because I do want to let them get leggy. And the one example I'll talk about now, I can expand on it in a future class, is leeks. And so leeks, I actually give them very little light when they're at this stage, or not a little light, but I don't give them any extra. And I want them to get really tall because the part of the leek that people cook with is the white blanched part. And so if I let them get leggy, then when I transplant them, I can pile some soil up higher on them and I can start that blanching of that shank. So there are examples of that where you don't have to do it. And then, yes, absolutely, for the plants that, the little seedlings that we need to give extra light, supplement. It would take me too long to explain right now the supplementing light, and I was planning on talking about it in a future class. So if it's okay, I promise I'll come back to that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else, Lou?
Nope, doesn't look like it.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, I promise I'm coming back to that seed starting thing. But yeah, just kind of layering in and okay, so we've talked about the seeds, that stage of life. We've talked about the cotyledon false leaf stage, and now we're going to talk about the juvenile true leaf stage. And so the beginning of this next stage of life cycles for plants is where, if you can see my cursor here, I'll start with this one. I'm not sure what species is it. If I were to guess, I'd say it's like a cabbage or a mustard green. But these leaves out here, those are the false leaves. Those are the cotyledons. They were the first to emerge. And these new ones that are just coming in, those are the true leaves. And you can already see how the shape of the leaves are different. This is kind of like heart-shaped and very smooth. And then you can see along the margins whoop, I clicked by mistake, I'm sorry. The margins are quite smooth, and then you can see how the true leaves coming in, they have like this texture on them, which I would kind of call Savoy or crinkly. And then you can also see the margins on them are already a little bit serrated, a little bit lobed. And then the next example here, this is a tomato seedling. You can see how the false leaves, the cotyledon leaves, they're oblong, and the margins of the leaves are smooth. And then as the true mature leaves are coming in, you can see how they're lobed, and the teeth of those lobes are very smooth. So there's this marked difference between the false leaves and the true leaves. And then these little seedlings up here, this is cilantro. And again, I would call this maybe like an oval shape cotyledon leaf. And then you can see the true leaf coming in here. And that is also lobed, but the margins are serrated or more sharply toothed. So yeah, I'm sure that was really obvious, and I didn't have to necessarily use those descriptive words, but you'll see in the next class that the more concretely we can describe these features, the more the better our observations will be with them moving forward. But anyways, that's for now. We'll just leave it at that. It is like once you start to see these true leaves coming in, you know that they've made a transition from their cotyledon stage to their juvenile stage. And then also when we think about supplementing light, then as soon as we start to see these true leaves coming in, then we know they're like doubled their leaf surface area, and so we don't have to supplement as much light for them with grow lights or whatsoever. So once you start to see those true leaves, if you do have them on grow lights supplementing, getting them up to 14 to 16 hours, you can take them away and they'll be fine with quite a bit less light, and they won't get leggy. The other thing about seeing these true leaves, which is important, is it's generally a sign that it's time to move them up into either a bigger container, which would be called potting up, or to plant them out into the garden. And so the reason for this is that when the true leaves come in, this isn't true for every single plant, and obviously it depends on the size of the container that you put them in. But when they get to the true leaf stage, if you have them in like a standard seed tray, like these, I think they're cabbage down here, then around that time, that's when the roots will start to hit the edge of the container, and they want to keep expanding, but the container is keeping them enclosed. And so they start to kind of circle around that container looking to get out. And if they do this too much, they'll start to stress out. And you will see signs of that stress in their false leaves. Their false leaves will start to turn like a yellow, maybe sometimes a red or purple color. And so if you do see that in these older cotyledon leaves, then that is the telltale sign that you really should move them up into a bigger container or get them out into the garden. Hopefully you've already moved them up and you don't see any of those signs of stress, but we don't live in a perfect world and we're busy, and sometimes it happens. But when you do see that's you got to move on it. Yeah, I'll explain more about that in another class. So then the way I would characterize this stage of growth is to call it a vegetative trending stage. And you'll see as we move along how we're going to define the difference between vegetative and generative. But cotyledon stage, or sorry, the juvenile stage is all about vegetative growth. It's all about adding biomass to the root system, the stems, and the leaves. Another important thing here in this stage of growth, you're going to want to use a fertilizer source, which whether it's compost or it's another, we'll get into all that later, but you want to use something that's higher in nitrogen because nitrogen is the nutrient that stimulates vegetative growth. And so, yeah, so I'll expand on that later. But just important to kind of mention that now. And yeah, I'll mention these signs of bolting in a couple slides. So the next stage after that is their mature stage. This is the stage that is characterized, it is defined by the plant moving from this vegetative stage to having the capacity to reproduce sexually. And so the telltale sign for this is the flowers that emerge. And so the flowers are obviously producing the pollen and the eggs. And so once they can do that, then they are ready to produce sexually, reproduce sexually. And so at this stage, if we think about the juvenile stage as being devoted, primarily the energies and resources are going to those roots, stem, and leaves, then once they start to move into this mature flowering stage, that is when their energies are more focused on developing those flowers, seeds, and fruits. And so at this stage, for the crops that you're aiming for this, like, so obviously like a tomato or peppers or eggplant, we want to encourage this as much as possible because that's the part of the plant that we're growing it for. And so it's recommended to add fertility inputs that are higher in phosphorus and potassium, and don't feed them as much nitrogen rich fertilizers. So I have a class 2 from now where we talk about the whole concept of plant nutrition, and I can expand on that in that class, but it bears mentioning right now. Does anybody have any questions?
I think you're good to move on.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. But here, this next slide, once it clicks for me, these transitions. Yeah, okay, there we go. So this is something that it took me a couple of years to really realize and appreciate. There is a very important transition from the juvenile stage to the mature flowering stage that it impacts a lot of our common garden crops. And you need to be aware of this, and you need to have good eyes in order to observe it. So a lot of the crops that do the best here in the Bow Valley are like leafy green crops. So like think about the spinach and the lettuce and all these brassicas, like your radishes and your broccolis and cauliflowers. Like all of these plants are really well adapted to cooler temperatures, and so they are really great for us to grow. What I think the mistake that new gardeners make is they don't understand life cycles of plants, and they don't look for these signs of how the plants move from one stage to the other. And so if we were to talk about just specifically spinach right here, obviously we grow spinach for its leaves, not its flowers. And actually all of these we grow for the vegetative portion of them and not their flowers. And so there's a temptation for gardeners to leave them in the soil and let them get as big as possible before harvesting them. But oftentimes they will bolt on us. They will transition from the juvenile stage to the flower stage really, really quickly. And if we don't see the first initial signs of this transition, then these plants, they can get bitter, they can get pithy, like unpalatable, they can get harder to harvest. And so I'll just talk for spinach and radish right now. When they start to move from this vegetative juvenile state to the mature generative state, what what you'll see is the main stem will start to all of a sudden grow up really quickly. Like they'll be kind of low growing, and then all of a sudden you'll be in the garden and you'll notice that they've jumped up a couple, like several centimeters. And if you look closer at that stem, the stem not only will have elongated in a short period of time, but it'll also have like fuzzy, they're called trichomes, but the main stem all of a sudden has this fuzzy texture to it, whereas before it had like a smoother texture to it. And so that is like the telltale sign that they're starting to bolt. And if you want to get a good crop out of what you've spent all this time growing, it's time to harvest. So that's where understanding the plant phenology life cycles, it can be really, really important, is understanding these signs that they just start to make. And if you don't get them out of the ground, then you've just wasted your time, you've wasted energy and all that stuff. Likewise, this is a good example here because this is broccoli, and you can see how, I mean, consider what broccoli is. It is like the buds right before it goes to flower. So we grow it and grow it and grow it, and we let it get absolutely on the edge of going to that flowering stage, and we harvest them. And so you can start to see it in this picture here. You can see the bolted one. You can see the little yellow flowers starting to emerge. Not like you couldn't eat it. You could totally still eat that. It would be delicious. But you can see these other ones. They don't have the yellow flowers yet, but you can see how that head of the flower buds is starting to separate. It's not as compact as it once was. So likely this gardener could have harvested them a couple days before, but we kind of try to get greedy and try to get them as big as possible before harvesting them. So that's a little lesson there. It's exactly the same with cauliflower too. We grow cauliflower to basically be as close to the flowering stage as possible, but not, we got to harvest it right before. So there's like this timing that's really, really important there. Another example that I would mention is lettuce. When lettuce is in the juvenile stage and it's trending vegetatively, its growth, its leaves are kind of splayed out in like a vase pattern. It's open, and then when it starts to trend generative towards its flowering stage, you'll see it starting to close up and get really dense, and it'll kind of start to go into like a football shape before all of a sudden it starts to produce flowers. And so the thing about lettuce is the further you let it get closed up and dense like that, and you closer it gets to that flowering stage, then it'll start to get bitter, and that flavor profile that we really like with lettuce is lost. So those are signs that I encourage you. It just comes with practice, just looking for them. And it'll save you a lot of time and effort if you see those little tiny details. And the same is true for the rest of these on here. I guess I could say one more example here at the bottom is the cilantro. When it's starting to move from its like leafy vegetative state where the leaves are perfect for eating and so forth, the leaves will change shape. They go from that lobed, sharp teeth kind of formation, and then as they move towards their flowering stage, the new leaves they produce are quite lacy, and they produce a whole bunch of, we would call it compound leaves that are really slight and oblong, and it's lost that lobed kind of, more like a maple leaf shape. So does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, we got a couple questions here in the chat. We'll start with Mary's. So she's wondering, can you pinch off the bolting stem to stop that stage for a while longer?
Well, it depends which crop you're talking about. Definitely for basil. Um, Basil, if you don't check on your basil for a couple days and you see it's starting to bolt, then yeah, you can totally pinch it and stifle that generative trend that they want to go along, and prolong that vegetative state. If we were to talk about broccoli here, you could harvest those heads, and the broccoli, like you could harvest those heads, you could eat them, and then the broccoli will start to send these side shoots of like the florets is what they're called. They won't be as big as this main head that they produce, but they'll produce a whole bunch of these smaller flower heads for the rest of the season, which is good picking and good eating. So yeah, it just kind of depends, Mary, on how the exact crop that we're talking about, and then also how much longer you have in that season to prolong that. But yeah, and then sorry, I'll say that there are other things like radish. Once they start to go generative like that, the roots get totally woody and unpalatable, and like no, you cannot. It's over.
Great. And then Francine had a question, I think kind of back to the fertilizer stuff. What's an example of inputs that are high in phosphorus and potassium? I keep hearing about how water that banana peel has been soaked in can be high in potassium.
All right, let me grab a book here.
Cue elevator music.
Well, I mean, the first one that is quite obvious is bone meal. So you can use bone meal that is lower nitrogen and higher phosphorus and potassium. And actually, I'll answer France just because we're on a timeline here, but I'll answer Francine. I'll have that ready kind of like the same way as I did at the start of this class. If somebody stumps me or I don't want to, but I am basically just looking up in this book, Teeming with Nutrients. That's what I'm going to find that answer in.
That's all the questions for now.
Okay. Just waiting for my screen to let me flip. I would say green sand. Green sand is the other input. It's a mineral rock, and that's higher in phosphorus. That would be one example there. Okay, so moving on to the next stage. I mean, technically fruiting is in the same stage as it's in the mature stage with the flowering stage, but there's a little bit of difference here, and it has to do with seed saving. So when the seeds within the fruits starts to mature, then the parent plant is again, they're allocating a lot of their energy and a lot of their sugars to if it's a succulent fruit, then they're going to be allocating a lot of their energy into first maturing the seed and then maturing the sweetness of the fruit, so it can encourage an animal to come and pick it and provide their transportation services. And then I also have to take a second here to make sure when I say the word fruit, I know that we're all think about like an apple or a pear or, a tomato, but when I say fruit in the future, I'm referring to botanical fruits, which includes like all the dry fruits too. So like a bean pod as it dries is botanically still a fruit. Anything that has the seeds encased within it, I'm talking about fruits in a more broad botanical way, and I'm not just referring to what you would find in the supermarket. So yeah, so this one isn't complicated. I don't have to spend too much time on it, but at the start of that fruiting stage, especially for the dry fruits, this is in the mustard family, or this is in the brassica family, but you can see how this is very early on in that fruiting stage. The pod is still very green and very soft, and you'll see as I flip to the later seed maturing stage, the difference. That pod is now this dried out straw brownish color. And so at the early stage of fruiting, the seeds are just starting to gain that energy that they're gathering from their parents, whereas at the later stages of seed maturation, or what I call senescence, those seeds are drying out and becoming harder, and they've absorbed all the energy that they possibly can from their parents. And so this is when we start to talk about seed saving, that's the pattern that you need to look for when it comes to harvesting those seeds so that you can save them correctly. So yeah, so you'll see the texture, it goes from soft to hard. You'll see that the color goes from greenish to this brownish straw color. And you'll find that if you pull on those fruits or the seeds, they shatter off their parent plant really, really easily. So they come off, or you don't have to pull on them very hard. And that's one of the telltale signs that you're picking them at the right state. If you pick them before, not only if you pick them when they're still kind of green, soft, then first of all, the parent plant hasn't been able to put all the energy and all the resources into the seeds. So if you were to pick them and start them, then you might have some success, but they won't sprout with the same amount of vigor and as much energy as they would if you pick them at a later stage. And then the other hazard of picking green seeds for the purpose of storing them is that when they're green and soft like that, they make very, very easy, they're an easy target for fungal infections. And if you get fungi, even though like fungi is really, really great in the soil around the root systems, but in this context, you do not want any fungal infections because they'll just degrade them and make them unviable. So that's the big lesson in terms of looking for seeds at this point. And so we have gone from seed to seed in this class. We've completed the full kind of loop. And so plants that do this entire grow from seed to coddling stage to juvenile stage to flowering to fruiting to mature seed, all in one season, those are what we call annuals. They complete their entire life cycle in one season, and they're generally, an annual is a very tender herbaceous plant that will get killed off by the harsh winter conditions, but it's so fast at completing that life cycle. That's what makes them very competitive and very successful. That's their adaptation. Most of the time too, an annual is what we call a dispersive plant, which means they're one of their main strategies for survival as a species is they're able to produce seeds quickly, and they're able to produce a lot of them. And we'll see in a future class why that is important to understand. So that is the definition of an annual, but a lot of crops that we grow in the garden and we treat them as annuals, are actually tender biennials. And so what I mean by this is that the first season that a lot of these plants grow, they will spend their entire first growing season in the cotyledon and juvenile stage of development. And then they will go through, they will survive that harsh winter temperature. The tops of them might get killed off, but the root system still stays alive. And in the spring, they'll send another shoot up and they will trend generatively. Their second season of growing will be all about flowers and all about fruits and seeds. And at the end of that second year, that's when they start to die. Hopefully having produced that next generation of seed. So just important to understand that these pictures here, this one is obviously cabbage. This, if I were to guess, because this is just a stock photo I took off the internet, this is definitely in the Apiaceae family. I would say that's probably carrot. So that's a biennial as well. And then this is either beet or Swiss chard. And so the thing about biennials and where we live is that most of these common garden biennials, we just get such cold, harsh winters that there's only a couple really, really hardy biennials that can make it through the winter and come back the next year. Two good examples of that is our Swiss chard, no, not our Swiss chard, our spinach and kale. They can easily get through the winter, but the rest of them need a little help. And I have a trick that I'm going to share with everybody, but that's going to be, I'm just teasing you all along, making you keep on listening to me talk. But it'll be part of the seed saving thing. And I'll run out of time if I keep talking about that. So I'm sorry. Any questions about that?
I think you're good to move on.
Okay. Yeah. Whoa, what's going on there? Okay. So that is annuals and biennials. I didn't know where to put this slide, but I feel like it goes in here somewhere. And so I talked about root systems last time. I haven't really talked that much about root systems in this class. What you have to understand about root growth is it is not a static thing for plants. They can be very, very dynamic in their root growth. During times of favorable soil conditions with lots of water, like in the springtime, generally we have more moisture in the soil. A root system of a plant can grow a lot of tiny little feeder fine root hairs, and they can grow out and they take advantage of the bonanza while they can. But as soil moisture conditions change throughout the year or the growing season, and those fine root hairs become somewhat superfluous, then they can slough them off into the soil because they don't really need them. If there's not as much water in the soil, then there's stomata in the leaves. They want to go from breathing out water through those stomata in order to bring more of those nutrients up dissolved in the water to when we get to drier soil conditions, those stomata, those guard cells in those leaves, they want to close up and conserve water during the day, during those hot, droughty times. So if their stomata is closed, then they don't need those extra roots, and so they give them away. But there is no such thing as waste in nature. Those roots that they give away, they get really quickly decomposed by members of the soil food web, and those nutrients that were in there, they get cycled, and so it just creates healthier and healthier growing conditions for those roots moving forward. So just because I'm talking about a root system doesn't mean that root system is staying the same the whole year. It can change and adapt. And we also talked about last time how they can give away those simple sugars through the roots, and they can change the different kind of exudates that they give off. So they're really smart in this way. I think that's all I got to say about that.
I think I missed a question here from Deb. She's wondering if raspberries, are they biannual?
Well, I'm actually moving to the next slide. That I would characterize them as perennial. So, yeah. So there are annuals that grow for one season, there are biennials that grow for two, and then there's the rest of them, which is just like a lot of species which are perennials. And I would say raspberries are perennials because they grow for multiple seasons and produce fruits and seeds in all of those seasons as far as I know. So yeah, perennials. And so I was going to, how am I on time actually?
It's
All right.
7:50.
All right, well, I think these are my last two slides. They're somewhat complex slides, but yeah, we're getting there. So I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about perennial life cycle strategies. It might not seem like you need this knowledge as a gardener here in the Bow Valley, but I think, well, I'm going to talk about taking stem cuttings and cloning in a future class. And so this is just setting the table for explaining how to do that, basically how to turn basically the whole, yeah, you just make everything just turns into a garden center once you know that tip. And so understanding how perennials kind of operate is central to understanding that. So starting off in the spring, when that phytochrome, that photoperiodism, the sensors in the leaf buds, when they feel that the hours of day they're getting enough hours of light per day and the nights are getting short enough, that's what triggers that bud breaking and opening. I talked about that last class. But there's something I heard several years ago now. I don't even know where I heard it from, so I'm kind of nervous about saying it, but I feel like my memory is good enough. I heard somebody say, or I read somewhere in a book, that in the spring, trees and woody perennials grow so fast at the tips. They are competing with their neighboring trees for access to light. And so this competition is so intense that they actually grow faster and they use more energy at this point in the spring than they can actually photosynthesize in real time. And so that doesn't really make any sense. Like, how can you grow that faster than you're making your own energy? And so the reason for this is that they grow really fast in the spring, but by the midsummer, when they start to feel the days getting shorter and the nights getting longer, again, that photoperiodism, that phytochrome, it tells those trees, the woody perennials, that they have to switch strategies. They have to stop putting as much energy they can at growing at the tips and getting taller and growing biomass that way. And they need to start sending their energy down to the root system. And so one reason why they need to stop growing at the tips this way, and you can see this picture here, you can see the previous year's growth here, how it's a little bit lighter and a little bit softer than the needles further up. And so that is an example of apical growth from one season. If that tree just kept on growing at its apical tip all the way up till the fall when it started to snow, then these tissues wouldn't have time to toughen up and get ready for the harsh winter temperatures. They would be too soft and they would be damaged. So by midsummer, if they stop this growth in their apical tips, then they they have enough time to toughen those tissues up. And so that's a good strategy, because otherwise it'd be a waste of resources. And so they direct their resources down into the root system, where I talked about in last class about how their root system is an energy storage system. So for the second half of the growing season, they're putting any surplus energy down into the root system. And this just makes so much, well, they're using their vascular system, where they're the tissue called the phloem, in order to transport it. And it makes so much sense if you think about it, because when you get to the spring, there tends to be more moisture in the soil. And so if there's more moisture in the soil, then they can bring that water up with the nutrients in it. And so they can pair that advantageous soil conditions with having that extra starchy, sugary energy, and they can pair that. So that is how they grow faster in the spring. Then they can make their own energy. And it's just pairing. It's like, I think it's a really cool adaptation that they've figured out in order to compete and to use their resources in the most wise way. And then if we need an analogy, the analogy that helps me kind of understand this is like this idea of sources and sinks. So in the spring, the roots are this extra source of energy, and these apical tips, the tips that they need to grow up and compete, those are the sinks for that extra energy. And then when they get to the late summer, then the roots become the sink where the extra energy goes, and the source for that energy is the leaves that are photosynthesizing. So they have these different energy moving strategies which have allowed them to compete and to be very successful in their ecosystems. And I know that doesn't sound like it pertains to your gardening right now, but again, I promise when we talk about taking stem cuttings, it'll make sense. Any question about that? Nice. Yeah, there we go. So we got the Hulk. So the apical tips growing, that's one of the primary ways that woody perennials grow. The other primary way that they grow is in the tree rings that they produce. And so if you were to take a cross section, as you can see this diagram is showing, you can see how if we take a slice out of it, there is, I should use my cursor here. I got to move so you can see here, we have the primary xylem. And so that is the vascular tissue that is basically, it's like a straw that sucks the water and nutrients up, always in one direction, from the roots to wherever it's going in the leaves. So that's the xylem on the inside. And then on the outside, we have the phloem. So this is the other vascular tissue, and that is the vascular tissue that's involved in moving the extra energy down to the root system in the late summer and then back up. So that's a two-way kind of transportation system for important resources. And every season that a tree or a woody perennial grows, a new xylem and phloem bundle will be produced from this cambium ring right here. And the xylem always goes on the inside and the phloem always goes on the outside. And so that's what gives us this tree ring effect that we see when we see a cut tree, is whereas the apical tips are growing in length, that's what allows trees and woody perennials to grow in girth, in its diameter every year. And you can see evidence of this if you look at the bark near the lower part of a tree, it looks like it's been ripped apart. like kind of like our friend the Hulk here, because that original skin on the outside of the tree, the bark or the epidermis, every year another ring is added inside. It stretches apart that bark, and that's what gives us that look, this really cool textured look of bark. And you can even, this picture that I took up by the lookout, you can see those rings of growth in there as it stretches back. And then it's also a reason why, if you think about apical growth and that cambium growth put together, then that's the reason why at the bottom of the tree it has this bark, this rough bark texture, but as you start to look up the tree, it gets smoother and smoother, because the bark at the bottom of the tree has been getting stretched out for many more years than the epidermis at the top. That's it. That was my presentation for today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Christian. So much good fundamental information in there. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And you can feel free to unmute yourself if you want, or you can type in the chat. Anyone?
I have a question. Can you guys hear me? Nice. So I'm curious about when you're seed saving, is there like a point where you can't save the seeds, like that it goes beyond, where they're like spoiled? And I guess it depends on the plant, but.
No, I mean, that's part of the reason why I wanted to mention the ballistics of seed dispersal, because yeah, sometimes I'll really be waiting for those seeds to get as mature as possible, but the seed pod dries out and it scatters them, you know. So there are some situations with these ballistic seed pods where you can wait too long. And then I guess the other situation is weather conditions during seed saving. You can wait and wait and wait, but if you see like some bad weather coming up, you really don't want to be harvesting and collecting seed in damp, either snowy or rainy conditions, because that's going to make those dry fruits wet. And you have to, if you really want to avoid those conditions, but if you have to, then it makes it a lot more challenging. You have to dry it really quickly, or you'll get those fungal infections way too quickly. So there can be a situation like that where you're like, I want to let them mature on the parent plant longer, but the next week is going to rain and I got to just cut my losses. It's close enough. I'll take them now.
Right, so you can just cut it at the base, and then could you dry it longer before actually collecting the seeds, or?
Yeah, you can do that.
If
yeah.
The weather, yeah.
Yeah, there are plants where, yeah, you would cut it right at the base, and yeah, you hang it up and let it dry out. And we remember from last class how there is still some energy storage capacity in the stems. And so that can allow a little bit of extra energy to work its way out to the seeds. So yeah, that is a technique you can do. So with some plants, doing it that way, it makes the cleaning stage a lot more work. So it just kind of depends.
Cool.
But
thanks, Christian.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke.
We have a question in the chat here from Ekaterina. Will you talk about starting the seeds indoors, and if so, when?
Yeah. Well, next class is about botanical language, and then the next one is about tissues and cellular biology and how those impact plant nutrition. So those are the next two. And then, so I don't know the date, but three 3 classes from now, I'll be talking about starting seeds indoors, and we'll really, that's the class where we're really going to take all this foundational knowledge, and it should apply really easily, and I'll be able to explain it much more clearly and succinctly because we have that foundation. So yes, indeed, we'll talk about that.
Great. Any more questions? There's lots of thanks, and that was awesome in the chat. But if anybody has any more questions or comments, you can feel free to unmute. And I just wanted to mention that the recordings will be posted on the Bow Valley Alliance website. Both the workshops from this week will be up in the next day or two, and then we're going to work on having them up always posted before the next one happens. So if you registered through FCSS and you're on the mailing list, I'll make sure I send out that link.
That was fantastic. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
I'll
Take
take
care.
one more
See you
if we
next
still got
time.
people in. I'll plug that the Bow Valley Food Alliance is actually having our first annual general meeting next Tuesday, I believe. I'm sure
Yep.
you can, yeah. So the Bow Valley Food Alliance, if anybody's not familiar with it, we are just a group of individuals, community members that are working together in order to create more food sovereignty in our community, create more equal food system, more food security, all that. We're working on anything we can do to help this community move forward and thrive and have a fair and equitable food system. So if hopefully there's people out there that are passionate about that and want to take part and join and help us work towards that goal.
Okay, say goodnight.
Night, buddy. Thanks for that, Christian. And thanks, everyone. We will see you on Monday. Remind us, Christian, what's the topic Monday night?
Yeah, we get to talk about botanical language and just we're just going to be talking. We're going to be talking about the more precise language we can use in our observations of plants, then the more meaningful they'll become, and it just it makes gardening that much more fulfilling. And when inevitably when we do have those situations where we fail in the garden because not everything goes perfect in the garden, if we have the right kind of language and understanding about all these parts, we'll be able to get the right kind of feedback so that we don't make the same mistakes again.
Mm-hmm. Great. We'll sound like legit gardeners then, too, right?
Well, I'm just trying. It's basically about teaching people how to speak botanese.
Perfect. Look forward to it.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Your cousin, your uncle.
Bye, Uncle Tit.
Bye, Fanny.
Bye.
Thanks, Dit.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks again, Christian.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Bye. You too.